Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today this is Shadow of the Galaxy Spoiler Analysis Part 10. So as usual, these are my first impression. I haven't played with any of those cards, at least most of those cards, so my opinion is as good as anybody else, but we're going to try to think about how playable and competitive those cards are going to be in a competitive environment. Starting out with the first card, Endless Legion. I forgot to talk about this last time, so I'll talk about it today. This is the most expensive card in the game, and only by itself, this has some potential because no matter how outrageously expensive a card can be, in trading card games, very often there's always going to be some sort of ways to cheat a super expensive card into play. We've, for example, had this with Galactic Ambition, which can cheat any unit into play. Unfortunately, Endless Legions is not a unit, therefore it does not combo with any of the card. It does not combo with Galactic Ambition. I think this card would be very good if it would work with Galactic Ambition. Unfortunately, it doesn't, and but the card has a lot of potential because it's not hard to believe that there will be some sort of cards in the future that might be able to cheat this card into play, so you don't have to pay the full resources cost. And since FFG has been capable of pushing this kind of designs before with Galactic Ambition, there's no reason to believe that they might not try something like this in the future. And if they do, this card might see a lot of play, because this card is pretty much a win button. It allows you to play all the cards you've resourced and put them into play. And all you gotta do is prepare this card by resourcing the perfect combination of cards that will just basically win you the game as they get played. So for example, you're gonna be playing cards like that puts a lot of bodies on the board, potentially a couple of sentinels to secure yourself on either side of the board, maybe some stuff that heals you, and some stuff that prevents the opponent from swiping the board with something like a Super Laser Blast, and there's plenty of cards that can do this, whether it's a Body Rook that can discard from your opponent's hand, or something along the line of a Relentless that can prevent your opponent from playing any events. Um, so this card is pretty much a win button. The problem is, so since we don't have any card that can shit this card into play, what are the other alternatives that we have in order to play that card? Well, right now the only scenario in which we can realistically cast a card that is that expensive would be against control. So if you're playing a green deck and you're playing against control, then this is pretty much a win button, because if you get there, once again you can kind of gather the best units into play, and then you put all those units in play, and there's nothing your opponent can do. But even in this matchup, going up to 14 resources is not something that is particularly easy, because it means that you have to resource every single turn. And it reaches, of course, a point in the game where resourcing would be only for the sole purpose of playing that card, which can be definitely a big cost. Not only that, it's also a double command requirement, meaning that if you do not play a double command deck, you have to pay 16 for that card, which really start to be very pretty much too expensive, even for control mirror, where your opponent almost will have enough time to mill you out before you get to that card. So this can be a win button versus control. The only problem is that control does have answers to that card. We're seeing more and more control decks playing Spark of Rebellion, if not in their main deck, in their sideboard. Obviously, Spark of the Rebellion is a hard counter to this card. Even your opponent plays only one or two copies of Spark of Rebellion. By the time you reach the point where you can get to that card, your opponent will have a million opportunities to draw a Spark of Rebellion and get rid of that card. And in which case you would have resourced all those cards for nothing, which is a big problem. So right now, I think the likelihood of this card seeing competitive play is very low, especially since double green has not been a particularly good archetype. In my opinion, it's been the worst double aspect colors in the game. But this card has a lot of potential to the future. That's why I give it a 4 out of 10. I think um, this card has a lot of potential to the future, and I don't think it's impossible that this card we might live in an environment or in a place where this card could be good, but I think it's fairly unlikely. Moving on, we got Supreme Leader Snoke. Um, Expensive card, and not but a powerful effect with a -2/-2 on everybody. Some people will probably have some flashback of cards such as Elesh Norn in Magic the Gathering that do something very similar. And those cards have been very powerful. The ability to not only kill all small units in the game, also makes any unit pretty much a lot weaker is also by itself. Even if you do not kill the unit, just having all the units on the board being -2/-2 by itself is very powerful. I think this card is has some problems. Obviously, it's quite expensive, and let's say if you don't manage to kill anything from his ability, which is often going to be the case, like it turns out there's not that many units in the game that has 2 health. So if you play that card and you manage to kill it right away, which is not that difficult to do, because quite later on in the game this card has no protective ability, then you basically spend 8 resources into nothing, which is pretty terrible. So this card does have immediate impact on the game theoretically, but if it's get dealt with, then this impact is effectively completely negated, which is kind of a big problem. With that being said, there are certain matchups in which this card is going to be very effective. If you're playing against aggro, getting to 8 resources is going to be a lot more difficult. But I would say if you're playing against a deck, so we've seen, for example, in Shadow of the Galaxy, a lot of ambush deck, a lot of deck that relies on ambush to kill stuff. And if you play this card and you put on basically only ways only removal that he plays are effectively ambush units, then the -2/-2 is going to be super effective. So there's some pro and cons. I think this card is going to be extremely meta dependent, and it's going to be extremely matchup dependent as well. So it's probably going to be most likely a sideboard card in certain meta as an answer to certain decks. With that being said, there's a couple of interesting interaction with the card, of course mostly with Palpatine's Return. You can basically play this card 2 turns earlier, which makes the card a lot more attractive because it's a force unit. So there's some sort of force archetype. With that being said, the Reanimator archetype so far has been in red and green, because red you want for the discard outlet with Fourth Throw and Kylo Ren, and green to play Palpatine's Return. So it's kind of off color for that very specific purpose. And obviously, Palpatine's Return does take into account aspect penalties, so if you do play this card of Palpatine's Return in an off-aspect deck, you would have to pay the full 8 resources. In any case, I give this card a 5 out of 10. As I said, it's very difficult to rate this card because it's going to be very meta-dependent and matchup dependent. But it's definitely a cool design, and very excited to see what people are able to do with this. Next we got Maz Kanata. So Maz Kanata is basically a strictly better version of Vanguard Ace. I've been using Vanguard Ace, as you know, out of U-Wing Reinforcement. You play U-Wing Reinforcement, you pull 2 other units, you put Vanguard Ace, and Vanguard Ace becomes a 4/4 in space, which is kind of nice. Maz Kanata, I think, is significantly better than Vanguard Ace because, for multiple reasons. The first one, she costs 1 instead of 2, so when you play U-Wing Reinforcement, it's going to be even easier to bring out 2 other units alongside Maz Kanata. In this case, she's going to be a 3/3. 3/3 on the ground, not quite as good as a 4/4 in space, but she does grow bigger and bigger as you play more units, which I think is great. And the other main advantage of Maz Kanata is that she's not a bad card to just play normally, while Vanguard is really dependent on U-Wing Reinforcement to see play. So, will this card see play in a deck that does not play U-Wing Reinforcement? That is not obvious, because the card is quite slow. By the time she grows big, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for the opponent to kill it. But I think in the U-Wing Reinforcement deck, she's absolutely going to see play, because U-Wing Reinforcement love 1-drops. You can go double 3-drop plus a 1-drop, and she becomes a 3/3 right away, and then grows bigger later on in the game. I think that's very, very strong. So I think the card is quite decent. It is situational, so I give it a 6 out of 10. But I think in the right deck, it can be a good card. And maybe it's going to see play outside of U-Wing decks, who knows. Next we got Spark of Hope. Another card that is really going to change the meta, is going to have a huge impact on the meta. This card is incredible. It's basically a ramp spell, an additional ramp, and this is going to have a huge impact on the game because so far, ramp-based heroism deck were not really played, unless you were playing a Han Solo deck. Playing ramp in heroism was a bit more difficult because you rely almost exclusively on resupply. Now you got access to Spark of Hope as another way to ramp, and this is a ramp that obviously you have a unit that dies in order to play it, but if you play a significant amount of units and you play a lot of early game units in your deck and you have good odds in triggering the Spark of Hope, then this card is going to be very similar to to a ramp. So I don't think it's as good as Resupply, and I don't think it's as good as Super Laser Technician, but it is close enough, in my opinion. So I rate this card at 9 out of 10. I think it's an excellent card. I think Ramp is extremely powerful in Star Wars Unlimited. I personally think Resupply is the best card in Star Wars Unlimited. Full stop. I think it's the overall best card that we've seen in Spark of Rebellion at least. And Spark of Hope is not far off from that card. So if you're playing a deck that wants to play more than 3 ramps, and you're playing a significant amount of early game units in which you have good odds of triggering the Spark of Hope early on in the game, I think this card is going to be very effective. Ramp is so good in Star Wars Limited because not only does it allow you to play into your bigger cards, it also allows you to deploy your leader faster. And this is just and that's why Ramp is so good. So this card is really good. Moving on, we got Finn. So Finn is so also wanted to make a little comparison. So with the bounty, so there's the 2 resources bounty that we also saw earlier. But the 2 resources bounty is a lot more difficult to trigger because you have to have an opponent unit into play, and then you have to kill that unit. This is far more difficult to use than this card. This is much easier to use than the other bounty card. Just to clear things up with that card. Next we got Finn. Unfortunately, the trend continues, and we're still the power level of leaders in Shadows of the Galaxy continue to disappoint me. I haven't been impressed by any of the leaders in Spark of Rebellion. I think there are some of them which are potentially playable and competitive and might be good, but there's no meta-defining leaders that we've seen so far in Shadows of the Galaxy, at least from in my opinion. And there are a lot of leaders that are simply just not good, and Finn, unfortunately, is one of them. So, what's the problem with Finn? First of all, very situational ability. You need to have a unit that has an upgrade that you want to defeat. Usually, the upgrade that you want to defeat are going to be experience. Is basically the lowest form of upgrade that you can possibly want to get rid of. Your opponent, it doesn't work, of course, on if your opponent plays upgrades on you, like for example, he plays an entrench or plays a bounty. You cannot defeat that upgrade because you can only defeat friendly upgrades. I think the card would be so much better if it allowed you to defeat an upgrade on a friendly unit instead of defeating a friendly upgrade on a unit. And so the ability is extremely situational. And even when you can use the ability, the effect is not that impressive. Turning an experience into a shield, there are going to be some situations where it's quite good. And obviously the deck building constraint, if you want to be using that ability consistently, you're going to need to have a lot of cards that get experience tokens. So there's some synergy. Obviously the synergy with Rose is quite obvious, even though I'm sure Rose is just a generally very good card, and there's far better decks for Rose. For example, I think Rose is far better in a Luke deck, for example. So yeah, the ability is just very situational and simply not that. And even when it can be used, I don't think it's that impressive of an ability. He has decent stats, 4-6 for 5, but nothing, of course, amazing. Maybe if he was a 4-7, that would make up for that. Basically, the same stats as Boba Fett would make up for such a weak ability, even though Boba's ability is far better. But yeah, no, 4-6 it's okay without being mind-blowing. And the ability does not get better once Finn is deployed. So, yeah, I don't see any reason to play this leader, and I think, once again, anything can work, and I'm sure there's going to be a card that synergizes around Finn in the future, but I don't think, I really have a hard time imagining a world in which this engine would actually be good. So I give Finn a 2 out of 10. Next we got the Mercenary Gunship, another very good card. 3-2 in space, 3-2 for 2 in space is just really good. Generally speaking, it allows you to trade with more space units, and if your opponent does not have anti-space, it puts a lot of pressure. And so 3-2 in space is significantly better than 3-2 on the ground. And it can be played in absolutely any deck because it's a true neutral card, and the ability that your opponent can use to take control of the units is quite annoying. Obviously, it is a very big downside, but keep in mind that you can also use that ability to get back the gunship back into your control once your opponent has used it. So I think it's going to be a great aggro card. I don't know if it's going to see play everywhere, and I know to some extent, but I think the card is very solid. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Moving on, we got Inspiring Mentor. Inspiring Mentor is interesting. So the stats for the +1/+1 for 2 is a pretty bad stat line, but obviously the idea is to play this on a ready unit, so then you can use it right away. So you can attack and get your +1/+1 counter bonus right away. It's unfortunate that you have to choose another friendly unit, so you're not always going to have another friendly unit into play. But if you do, then the card becomes quite good. Another cool thing is that one of the big disadvantages of upgrade is when it gets you lose your upgrade and you lose your unit, you are gonna have to move the you're basically doing a 2-for-1, but in this case you do get a compensation of being able to get an experience on another friendly unit. So I feel overall the card can be quite good as long as you are able to swarm the board with enough units. So I think I think it can see play. I think it is playable. I think it's unlikely to see play though, because the problem with this card, as I said, is that if you do not have another unit to put tokens on, then the card is basically just dead. So without taking into account, this is I decided to rate this a 4 out of 10. It's not amazing, but I don't think it's terrible. Next, we got a very unique card called Final Showdown, which allows you to ready all of your unit, but if during the next regroup phase you lose the game, so you need to win with what you have. So this card is can be very powerful because obviously you play this card, you're going to be readying a bunch of units to get another attack phase, and you can just deal a bunch of damage with this and hopefully win the game. But there's a few issues. So first of all, it's double yellow, so that's obviously going to limit a lot the scope in which you can play this card, in situation in which you're going to be able to play this card. You need to have a significant board to be able to play that. And then once you've played that, you need to hope that your opponent doesn't have some sort of removal or exhaust effect that will prevent you from finishing off the opponent. So it's a very high risk card. But I think there are situations in which you can win with this. I don't think this card is going to be a 3-of in a deck. I think it's going to be this 1-of card that in some situation can be very effective. I think it's going to be very strong in a mirror of aggro if you're playing Boba Yellow and you're playing in a mirror of aggro, and those matchups are very much about racing, and Final Showdowns can give you this last little push that allows you to win the game. So I think it's a decent card. I give it a 5 out of 10. I think if it sees play, it's going to be very niche, but I think there's a good chance it's going to see play. We'll see if Boba Yellow managed to find a spot for it, but if it's going to see play, it's going to be as a 1-of, it's going to be in the side in the sideboard. By the way, that's another very situational legendary. So far, I have to say that legendaries have been fairly situational in this set, which is good for our wallet, I guess. So we're not gonna have to chase those 3 of legendaries. Moving on, we got Resourceful Pursuer. Not a bad card. 5/6 Saboteurs, so high stats for a 5-drop, and the Saboteur keyword is not bad on such a big unit. The reason why I only give this card a 3 out of 10 is simply because obviously 5-drop that doesn't have immediate impact on the board, but also because I think there are better options, which we're gonna see, which we're gonna talk about later. There's often going to be better options for 5-drops. So I think this card is mostly designed for draft, and I think in draft it's going to be very solid. Next we got another leaders, and once again a leader that I don't think is very good. So what does she do? Basically, she mills you 1 card out of your deck every turn, okay? And then basically when she deploys, she basically kind of draw you a card, and she can be a 5/5. Yeah, so in my opinion, with the current state of the game, so ignoring any other card that might be revealed in the future, just in a vacuum, just right now, if this card was printed and added to the game right now, she would be the worst leader in the game. A lot worse than IG-88. And the reason being is simply, well, her ability is currently more of a downside than an upside. There's just not that many cards that synergize with the discard right now, and the stats are horrendous. 2/5 is absolutely terrible. There's nothing you can do with a 2/5 leader that doesn't do anything. Drawing a card is neat. At least you get some value out of your leaders, since she's gonna die almost right away with only 5 HP. And not only that, even if you manage to get 5 cards with different costs in your discard pile, which is far from obvious and it's probably not going to happen by the time you deploy Dr. Aphra. By the time you deploy Dr. Aphra, basically you would have 3 cards in your discard pile thanks to her ability, because that's going to be 1 for turn 2, 1 for turn 3, and 1 for turn 4. That's 3 cards. So 3 cards, that's mathematically impossible to have. It's very unlikely that you're going to have 5 cards with different costs in your discard by even with her ability. So she's probably not going to be a 5/5 when she deploys. But even if she was a 5/5, let's say she's going to be absolutely horrendous. Like even if you manage to get her 5/5, it's still not super impressive. It still dies to anything. Still dies to force choke. Still dies to take down. Still dies to pretty much anything in the game, really. So that is just not impressive at all. She doesn't have any relevant traits for French. She's not underworld. She's not imperial. She's nothing. She's just French. And icing on the cake, like the nail in the coffin, is that she is competing with Boba Fett. Like, in what universe would you play her in a competitive setting over Boba Fett? I don't see it. So that's basically my judgment, right? Ignoring what can happen in the future. So obviously this card has not been designed to be played on its own. She's been designed to be part of an archetype, which is a self-mill archetype, where you basically put your own card in your discard pile in order to get bonus. And hopefully we're going to see more cards that have some sort of synergy with it. And there are already some. I think there's a couple of cards that have synergy with the amount of different costs you have in your discard. Well, so so that's basically what the designers are trying to convey here, and they want us to do that. And the question is, how good is this card in the context, in the hypothetical context in which we would have an archetypes, a self-mill archetypes? And the answer to that question is that's not that good either. Because here's the thing. I know for a fact that self-mill archetypes can be very powerful. I've played enough Magic the Gathering to know that. I've played enough Dredge and stuff like this. But here's the thing. A mill per turn is not that good. Like, a mill per turn is not really enough mill to really power an engine based on the discard pile. If you really want to power an engine based on your discard pile, you're much better off. You need to have a card that mills you like 5 cards of your discard pile, or 3 or 4 cards, or at least 2 cards per turn, or a card that mills you 5 a turn. Only 1 a turn is very, very, very slow of an engine. So, if let's say we live in a world where there's going to be some self-milling cards and some cards that are really powerful when they get out of the discard pile and stuff. Or we're gonna have some sort of reanimator. Even if you want to play reanimator with Palpatine's Return, using Dr. Aphra. I think you are better off. This is gonna be a hot take, right? But I think you're better off playing those milling cards, the very powerful self-milling card, and then play Boba Fett rather than play her. Because, as I said, a mill per turn, that's not a lot. That's not enough to power an engine. You're going to need a real engine, something that really mills you significantly to make this deck fast enough and consistent enough. So yeah, even in a self-milling deck, I don't see it. I don't think this card is gonna be good, even in the self-milling card. So obviously, I could be completely wrong, and maybe this kind of deck. But like, think about everything you are giving up just in order to have this 1 mill turn. You are giving up the stats, like the stats difference between a Boba Fett and this is abysmal. That this is like a huge difference of stats. You're giving up on the ready ability of Boba Fett, which is very powerful. So my hot take is that even in the self-milling deck, I don't think she's gonna be the one if self-milling deck end up being a thing. So I give it a 2 out of 10. Just I give you a little bit of benefit of the doubt, just in case, because she has a very unique effect. She does something that no other leaders can do, that no other leader does. I don't think she does it well, though. That's my problem. If the card was like discard 2 cards per turn instead of 1, I would be a lot more excited about it for the future. Moving on, we got a Chewbacca. So Chewbacca in a vacuum is not bad. He has a huge amount of stats, has immediate impact on the game, kills something that has 5 HP or less. That's pretty good. And it can be smuggled as well, so that's probably a good option to have against control. The only problem I have with him is like he's very similar to Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight, and he's worse. I think if I have the choice between Chewbacca and Jedi Knight, I would play Luke Skywalker all the time. I would much rather play Luke Skywalker, and I don't think you can afford to play both because they're really similar cards at the end of the day. So me, he's obviously more expensive. His tight lines is very tanky but doesn't really kill anything. He has to attack something first, gets a bunch of grits, and hope that he's going to survive to be able to swing again. The Smoggle is a different aspect color, which is also kind of a bummer. Because it means that now if you want to benefit from the Smoggle, you have to play this specifically in a red blue deck. So maybe there's going to be some powerful synergy with Grid that we haven't seen yet on the heroism side that's going to make him better. But for now, and from what I'm seeing, I'm not very thrilled by this card. I think it's 3 out of 10. Not because he's bad, but because there are just better options out there. Moving on, we got Unlicensed Headhunter. And this card is very good, but the downside is huge. Having to deal your base 5 damage whenever this thing dies is just very annoying. I'm saying when this thing dies because most of the time it's going to happen like this. The Saboteur keyword is good, but maybe if we live in a meta where like a 3-2 Saboteur is like super strong, I could see this. Obviously 3-2 for 2 in space is always nice, but having to deal yourself 5 damage when this thing dies is such a big downside. So for me, I give it a 4 out of 10. I think there's a world where this card sees plays, but in a vacuum, I don't think it's very strong. Now we got the Let the Wookiee Win. So this card is one of these cards which gives the opponent the choice of the card. And historically, card that give the opponent a choice between two choices are bad. And the reason for it is because the opponent is always going to choose the option that's worse for you, and so you need to be in a situation where both of those options are good. So we had this example with I Am Your Father, which even though I Am Your Father has 2 very strong options, those options still remain. The fact that your opponent has to choose between one of the 2 is kind of a deal breaker for the card. I mean, I Am Your Father has seen a little bit of play, but I think it's because the control deck really needed some card draw and didn't really have any other options. I don't think anybody is thrilled to play that card, to be honest. And it is the best in that category. Then you have plenty of other cards like I Had No Choice, which once again give your opponent the choice. And those cards typically are not great because they're very situational. You really need to be in a situation where both of the cases are very strong. The problem here is Let the Wookiee Win is that both options are very situational. To be able to ready up to 6 resources, it can be nice, assuming you got a lot of tap resources, assuming you got something better, very strong to play afterwards. The other option, you need to have a ready friendly unit that is a Wookiee. That is a very steep condition. So you got 2 conditions that are that are quite conditional already together, and now you need to have both of those things to be the case, because otherwise your opponent is always going to choose the option that is worse for you. So I honestly have a very hard time imagining a situation where this card would be good. This is for me a 1 out of 10. I don't think it's playable. Even in a dedicated Wookiee deck, I don't think this card is playable. Moving on to Swoop Down. This card is one of those tricks that basically allow you to, even though it's not a trick, unfortunately, it's one of those cards that allows you to attack with your units in order to kill other units. So we've seen that, for example, with Shoot First, which is probably the best example in that category. Swoop Down, though, is kind of a shoot first, but a lot more situational. Because what you need is specifically a space unit, and you need to be hitting specifically a ground unit. And that is a problem, because those cards already by themselves are quite situational, because you need to have a unit into play, and you need to be wanting to kill that unit with your own unit, because sometimes you just want to attack base. So already Shoot First is considered to be kind of a situational card already. This card is basically Shoot First, but like 20 times more situational, which is once again, I don't see a scenario where this card is going to see play. Of course, there's going to be a situation where this card is very good, but I think it's generally speaking too situational for competitive play. So I rate this card a 3 out of 10. Next, we got Heroic Resolve. So basically, 1 resource +1/+1 upgrade by themselves are quite good for aggro, especially when they are universal, can be played on either space and ground units. it's quite good. So here we're talking about a very easy upgrade to play. Only costs 1, can be played on anything, so quite good. And then on top of this, you get an ability which I think is quite powerful, because giving a +4 and overwhelm to an attack is can be very powerful, and your opponent is really gonna have to be mindful of that upgrade. Icing on the cake, the card is Heroism, which means that it does not disturb your 4 cause I believe in. It's a red card, so it triggers on Fighter for Freedom. So I think there's a lot of good thing going on, and I think this card is going to be worth testing in aggro. I don't know if it's going to make the cut in aggro, but I think it has potential, and I think aggro should definitely consider playing this card. So I give it a 6 out of 10. Moving on, we got Detention, Block Rescue. Not a terrible card on its own, but the problem with this card is like it's basically a worse version of the card that already exists. Open Fire is basically better than this card. The upside of being able to deal 6 damage to units that are guarding a captured unit, I think that's very situational. I don't think we're gonna see many capture in this set. I've been quite underwhelmed by the power level of capture cards, generally speaking. So I don't think the upside is worth losing 1 damage on the damage thing. So to me, 2 out of 10, I don't see. Once again, I just give it a 2 just because it might, maybe there's a world where there's capture unit that are actually, that are there's a lot of capture units somehow or whatever, but even then, that's still, I still wouldn't trade the 1 damage compared to an Open Fire, which I think is so much better than this. Next, we got 4 LOM, and this guy is great. He's great for multiple reasons. First of all, 4/4/4/4 ambush, full stop, no condition. This by itself is very, very, very good. We saw earlier there's a 2/4 raid 2 ambush, which I think was quite good, but this one is better because it's basically a 4/4/4/4. So this guy's already, even ignoring the text here underneath, just by itself, just a 4/4/4/4 ambush already is extremely solid. Another thing that makes this card very good is that it is basically Boba Yellow. One of the biggest weakness of Boba Yellow has been the 4-drops. Boba Yellow has already had very, very bad 4-drops, and it was a struggle for the deck because the deck doesn't have ramp, so it cannot go from 3-drop to 5-drops. So this deck really needed some good 4-drops, and I think this is it. I think this is exactly the 4-drop that the Boba Yellow were looking for. So I think this card is going to see play at least in Boba Yellow, and is going to see play probably in many other decks. So I think it's really good. Not only because the card is very solid by itself, but also because it answers a very specific need for a deck. The other upside is quite cool as well, giving to Zuckuss a +1/+1 ambush. It's quite situational because you need to get specifically that card into hand, and then you need 4 LM to survive and all that stuff. So quite situational, but it's, once again, everything you get on top of just being a 4/4 ambush is basically just a bonus, right? And it turns out that Zuckuss is very playable. We'll talk about him right after. So I give it an 8 out of 10. I think this card is really good. Talking now about Zuckuss. So basically, I said it earlier. So this ability, even if it was irrelevant, would still not matter. This card would still be great. But the fact that Zuckuss is really good also makes 4 LOM better. Because obviously Zuckuss is pretty good. He's a 6/6 for 5. This is very, very high stat. This is basically the same stats as Podamron. And the reason why a lot of people have been excited for Podamron is just because 6/6 for 5 is just very good stat line. But this is not over. He has the Saboteur keyword, and he gives +1/+1 and Saboteur keyword to Fair LOM. So obviously Zuckuss, just being a 5/5 for 6, that's already very Saboteur. That's already by itself very solid. And once again, the +1/+1 Saboteur to 4 LOM, that's just icing on the cake. But the fact that he can get ambush from F4 LOM is a big deal. Because if you can get that ambush, then we're talking about the 7/7 Saboteur ambush can one-shot any leader in the game almost. That's really, really good. So a lot of good things going on. I think those two are going to see play in the same deck. Probably in Boba Yellow. I would be very surprised if that's not the case. There is a chance where people will play for LOM but decide to not play Zuckuss because um, Boba Yellow has other very strong options in 5 drops, even though you can argue 4 drops are fairly open. There's not that many 4 drops that are good. However, there's a lot of very strong 5 drops, so it's going to be a little bit harder for Zuckuss to find its way in there. And there's also the problem, like if he doesn't have uh, ambush, which will be the case most of the time, then he's basically a 5 drop with no immediate impact on the game, which is a problem. So overall, I get this card a 7 out of 10. Moving on, we got Ambo. Basically a 3/4 for 3 and can heal whenever he completes an attack, when he defeats a unit. Ability is fairly situational. The stat line is okay. I think this card is fine, but I think there's better things to play in Constructed, generally speaking, so I'll be surprised if this card makes the cut in Constructed, but it's not impossible, so I give it a 4 out of 10. Moving on, we got Desperate Attack. So attack with an unit and +2 attack. On by itself, very good. The problem is the condition is you need to be attacking with a damaged unit. So obviously that's a condition that is quite steep because it's really not under your control most of the time if a unit gets damaged and manages to survive. That's something that happens incidentally, but it's hard to make this happen consistently. So I think this condition really what kills the card. And unfortunately, I'm going to give this a 1 out of 10. I think there are far better options for boost spells. For example, the blaster is like stuff like this. Like there's just far better options. I would even say that precision fire, +2 attack, like basically give saboteur if it's a trooper, get +2. Even that is better than this. So yeah, no, I don't think this card is very good. Last, we got Bounty Guild Initiate. So this is kind of a little version of Death Trooper. So by itself, interesting. The problem is to trigger the ability, you need to have another Bounty Hunter. Right now, we haven't seen any other card that really synergizes with Bounty Hunter in general. So it is a little bit difficult to imagine a Bounty Hunter deck at the moment. So if there's a lot of upside and a lot of synergies around Bounty Hunters, and we end up seeing some sort of Bounty Hunter deck emerging, I could see this card seeing play. But right now that doesn't really seem to be the case. So we'll see how that goes. But I don't think it's very likely that a Bounty Hunter deck, there's going to be enough space for Bounty Hunter archetypes in this set, since it's like almost the first card that really synergizes with Bounty Hunters. So obviously it can only damage ground units. It leaves behind a 1/2 body. Death Trooper has the advantage of being unconditional. You don't need to have another unit into play to trigger it, and it leaves a 3/1 behind, which is far better. It's a 3 drop against a 1 drop, I guess, but yeah. So I give it the card a 3 out of the 10. I'm kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt in case there's going to be some Bounty Hunter, in which case the card might be playable, but one of the things that really kills this card, in my opinion, is the fact that it's not Underworld. If it was Underworld, I think there would be a lot of very interesting synergies with McClunky getting back into play it back, and I think there's a lot of like bouncing your own card in the Bounty Hunter, sorry, in the Underworld archetypes. So I feel like if this card was Underworld, it would be so much better. So we'll see how it goes, but for now, I'll give it a 3 out of 10. And here it is. So thank you so much for watching this video until the end. If you like the content, as usual, like and subscribe. And if you think I'm wrong on any of my analysis, please let me know. And also, if you're interested in getting some coaching from me, I will put my coaching schedule in the comments below, so you can check it out and see if there's something that would work for you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.